James Whittaker's mansion stood atop a hill overlooking New York City, where the urban lights sparkled like lost stars. That night, the air in the grand ballroom was saturated with opulence. The light from the crystal chandeliers bathed the glossy marble floor, and ancient paintings on the walls silently told stories of power and wealth. The guests, clad in tailored suits and glamorous evening gowns, raised their champagne glasses as their laughter echoed like a symphony of self-satisfaction. This was James Whittaker's world, where money was power and truth. James, 35, was a white millionaire with carefully combed blonde hair and piercing blue eyes, sharp as blades. He stood near the large window, his black suit tailored to accentuate his tall, commanding frame, radiating a confidence that bordered on arrogance. To James, wealth was not just success, but proof of his superiority over the rest of the world. He had built his financial empire from scratch, or at least that was the story he liked to tell. He had inherited a significant fortune from his father, but James never mentioned that detail. To him, the past didn't matter. Only the present and the power it brought was worth anything. Tonight's party was yet another display of dominance. Everyone present belonged to the elite investors, politicians, and media stars, orbiting James like planets around the sun. He smiled, responding to flattery with carefully calculated politeness, but his gaze remained sharp, as if assessing everyone in the room. No one dared to challenge James Whittaker, except for one man, Marcus Reed. Marcus, slightly shorter than James, with curly black hair and a half-smile that always hinted at mischief, approached him with a glass of scotch. Marcus had been James's close friend since college, but their friendship resembled a chess match more than genuine affection. They constantly competed, from business deals to extravagant pastimes. Marcus enjoyed putting James in difficult situations, not out of envy, but because he loved watching James struggle to maintain his flawless image. James, Marcus said in a smooth, provocative tone, "You always say, money can buy anything, right? Love, fame, even people." James raised an eyebrow, sipping from the glass in his hand. "Of course," he replied, calm, but unmistakably smug. "Money doesn't just buy, it shapes. Whatever I want, I can make it happen." Marcus let out a hearty laugh, his eyes glinting with mischief. "Really? Then let me challenge you for once." He moved toward the window and gestured for James to follow. From their vantage point, they could see down the hill to the street below, where the weak glow of streetlights illuminated slouched figures. Marcus pointed to a small figure curled up on the sidewalk beside a piece of cardboard and an old tin can. "Her," Marcus said, his voice full of challenge. "I bet you can't turn her into a lady fit for this room." James squinted, trying to see more clearly. The woman looked haggard, her tangled hair hiding most of her face, and her torn coat barely shielded her from the cold New York night. Under the dim streetlight, her dark skin stood out, but not in a way that caught James's attention. To him, she was just another part of the world. He routinely ignored the world of the invisible. "You're joking, James," said voice tinged with surprise, yet laced with disdain. "She's a beggar. This isn't even worth my time." "I'm completely serious," Marcus replied, his smile widening. "Marry her, James. Turn her into someone everyone here would have to tip our hats to. Prove that your money really can do anything." James looked at Marcus, a spark of irritation igniting in his chest. He didn't like being challenged, especially not in front of guests discreetly watching from a distance. Marcus's words weren't just a joke, but a direct assault on his pride. James turned back toward the street, studying the figure below more intently this time. She sat motionless, as if used to being ignored by the world. Something was unsettling in that stillness, but he quickly dismissed the feeling. "Why should I lower myself to do this?" James asked coldly, eyes still locked on Marcus. "Because you believe nothing is impossible with money," Marcus replied, voice as smooth as a salesman's. And because I'll make it worth your while. $2 million, James. If you succeed, I pay. If you fail, you pay me. The room seemed to grow quieter, as if everyone could feel the tension in the air. A few nearby guests stopped talking and turned to look at James and Marcus. This wasn't just a bet, it was a power play. And James knew that if he refused, his reputation would take a hit. He set his glass down on the table, the movement slow but deliberate. His pride, the very force that had carried him through every challenge in life, was now on the line. "All right, James," said his voice low but razor sharp. 3 months. She'll become someone you wouldn't recognize, a real lady. Laughter and applause erupted from the crowd, but James didn't react. His eyes remained fixed on the silhouette under the flickering streetlight, now almost fading into the darkness. He wasn't sure what he saw in her, a challenge, a project, or a new way to assert himself. Whatever it was, he had made his decision. "Come on," Marcus said, already heading toward the staircase. "Let's meet your muse." James followed, a mix of excitement and unease rising within him. As they left the warm, glittering ballroom, the music and laughter faded behind them, replaced by the chill of the New York night. Under the weak glow of the street lamp, the woman was still there, unmoving like a statue. As James and Marcus approached, she lifted her head, her deep-set eyes meeting James's gaze. Something made him pause at that moment. Not her raggedness or poverty, but a quiet strength, a flicker of fire he hadn't expected. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice raspy but unwavering. James smiled, though the smile lacked warmth. "I'm the man who will change your life," he replied, extending his hand. "What's your name?" She looked at him, eyes probing, as if weighing whether this was an opportunity or a trap. After a long silence, she spoke softly, yet clearly, "Aisha." "Aisha Coleman." James nodded, feeling like he had just stepped into a game whose rules he didn't fully understand. But that was fine. He was James Whitaker, and he always won. The New York night was bitterly cold, and James Whitaker's breath formed thin wisps in the air. He walked down the path leading away from the mansion, the sharp clack of his polished leather shoes echoing evenly on the pavement. Beside him, Marcus Reed kept his signature half-smile, as if savoring every second of the game he had initiated. The street lamp ahead flickered, casting light on a quiet corner where Aisha Coleman sat curled up, a piece of cardboard beside her, scrawled with the words, "Please, help. Thank you." A tin can in front of her held only a few scattered coins glinting weakly under the dim light. James stopped a few steps away from Aisha, his hands tucked into the pockets of his cashmere coat, his gaze assessing. From this distance, he could see more clearly the extent of her exhaustion. Messy black hair, dark skin streaked with dirt, and thin hands clutching a torn coat to fend off the cold. But what made James pause wasn't her appearance, but her eyes. Deep, sharp, and holding a story he had no intention of uncovering. He cleared his throat, trying to reclaim his usual air of confidence. "You," James said, his voice cutting through the still air, carrying a faint tone of condescension. "What's your name?" Aisha slowly raised her head, her eyes moving from James to Marcus, then back to James. She didn't answer immediately, as if weighing what these two well-dressed men could want from her. Life on the streets had taught her that nothing came for free, and generosity often came with a cost. "Aisha," she finally replied, her voice raspy but steady. "Aisha Coleman." James nodded but didn't extend his hand. He didn't want to touch her, not because of the dirt, but because something in her presence made him uncomfortable, a reminder of the world he had always chosen to ignore. "Aisha," he repeated as if testing the name. "I have a proposal for you. standing just behind Marcus, chuckled, but Aisha paid him no mind. Her eyes were locked on James, cautious. What kind of proposal? She asked, her tone betraying no attempt to hide her suspicion. James glanced at Marcus to ensure his friend was watching every moment. Then he turned back to Aisha, his voice smoothing out, like when pitching ideas to investors in a boardroom. "I want to change your life," he said. "A home food, new clothes, everything you need, so you'll never have to sit here again. In return, you only have to agree to do one thing for me." Aisha furrowed her brow, her hands tightening around her coat. She wasn't naive. She knew promises like this often come with murky conditions. "What thing?" she asked, her voice low but sharp. James smiled, but it was cold, devoid of warmth. "Marry me," he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Become my wife, and I'll give you a life you never dared to dream of." His words hung in the air, heavy as the night's chill. Aisha blinked, uncertain she'd heard him correctly. She looked at James, then turned to Marcus, who struggled to hide laughter. "You're joking," she said, her voice tinged with anger. "What kind of sick game is this?" "This isn't a joke," James replied, his voice calm but full of self-satisfaction. "I'm serious. You marry me, live in my world, and I'll turn you into someone completely different. You want to get off this street, don't you?" Aisha stayed silent, her gaze dropping to the tin can before her. The coins inside were all she had earned today, not enough for a decent meal, let alone survival through the winter. She remembered who she used to be, Aisha Coleman, a social worker once employed at a community center in Brooklyn. She had helped the homeless and struggling families, believing she could make a difference. But then her family went bankrupt after a failed investment. Her parents died in despair, and Aisha lost everything: her home, her job, her faith in the world. Now here she sat, treated like some plaything by two wealthy strangers. "What do you want from me?" Aisha asked, her voice quieter now, but not out of fear. She was fighting to contain her fury. "Why me?" James shrugged, as if the question wasn't worth deep reflection. "Because you're here," he replied, "and because I can." His words were like a slap to her dignity. Aisha wanted to stand and walk away, but her legs felt like lead, and the cold had seeped into her bones. She thought of the nights sleeping under bridges, the days digging through trash for food, and the judgmental eyes of passers-by. She had fought to survive, but with each passing day, a part of her had died. James's offer, as humiliating as it was, felt like a way out. A way out she wasn't sure she could refuse. Sensing Aisha's hesitation, Marcus stepped forward, his tone smooth like a salesman's. "Miss Coleman, think about it. A roof over your head, hot meals, and lots of money. All you have to do is say yes, and your life changes forever." Aisha looked at Marcus, then back to James. In James's eyes, she saw no compassion, only the confidence of a man used to controlling everything. But she also saw an opportunity not to become their idea of a lady, but to reclaim a piece of herself that had been lost on these streets. "Hurry up and decide," James said, his voice tinged with impatience. "Opportunities like this don't come twice." Aisha took a deep breath, her breath trembling in the cold air. She thought of her mother, who once told her self-respect was the one thing no one could take away. But she also thought of hunger, cold, and fatigue that had reached her bones. She hated herself for this, but she no longer had the strength to refuse. "All right," she said, her voice soft but clear. "I agree." James nodded, as if he had just closed a business deal. "Good," he said, turning to Marcus with a victorious smile. "Let's begin." Marcus clapped, his laughter echoing into the night. "I knew you wouldn't disappoint me, James," he said, then glanced at Aisha with intrigue. And you, Miss Coleman, welcome to the game. Aisha said nothing. She stood up, clutching her ragged coat, her eyes still fixed on James. At that moment, she was no longer just a homeless woman. She was Aisha Coleman, someone who had survived the worst life had thrown at her. And though she had no idea what lay ahead, she silently vowed not to let this man or anyone else define her worth. James gestured for her to follow, and Aisha stepped forward, her worn shoes scraping against the pavement. Behind them, the flickering streetlight seemed to signal the beginning of a journey neither could fully predict. The morning at the Manhattan District Courthouse was gray and cold, as if the sky itself was mirroring Aisha Coleman's state of mind. She stood in a small corner of the hallway, clutching her tattered coat, her old shoes scraping against the icy marble floor. Just hours ago, she'd been sitting on the sidewalk, holding on to the little warmth a piece of cardboard could offer. Now she was about to become the wife of James Whitaker, a white millionaire she had only met the night before. The thought made Aisha feel like she was living in a strange dream, but not a beautiful one. Instead, a nightmare wrapped in silk. James stood a few meters away, dressed in a tailored black suit, his piercing blue eyes scanning his phone screen. He hadn't looked at Aisha or spoken to her since they'd left the street the night before. For James, this moment wasn't a wedding. It was the first move in a transaction, a wager he had sworn to win. He had arranged everything at breakneck speed, the paperwork, the witnesses, and a cheap white dress delivered to Aisha by his assistant. The dress, though clean, looked out of place on her, as if it were a reminder that she didn't belong in this world. Aisha looked down at the dress, a suffocating feeling rising in her chest. She remembered her days as a social worker in Brooklyn, when she used to help homeless women rebuild their lives. She had told them they were worthy of respect, that no one had the right to define their value. And yet here she was, about to sign a piece of paper that would make her the project of a wealthy man. Her pride screamed, but the hunger, the cold, and the exhaustion of street life had silenced her. "Miss Coleman," a dry voice called out, pulling Aisha from her thoughts. A middle-aged court clerk with thick glasses handed her a stack of papers. "Sign here." Aisha took the pen, her hand trembling. She stared at the lines of text marriage certificate, a legal document that would bind her to James Whitaker. She looked up, her eyes searching for James, hoping to see a flicker of something, kindness, sincerity, anything. But James merely nodded, his voice cold. "Sign it. We don't have all day." His words hit like a blade. Aisha took a deep breath, trying to suppress the shame. She thought of her mother, who had always taught her that a black woman must hold her head high, no matter how the world treated her. But her mother wasn't here, and Aisha no longer had the strength to fight the whole world. With a shaking hand, she signed Aisha Coleman, the handwriting crooked but clear. As she handed the pen back to James, their fingers accidentally brushed. James immediately pulled his hand back, as if the contact had disturbed him. The judge, an older woman with tired eyes, began the ceremony. Her voice was flat, emotionless, as if she had done this hundreds of times. "James Whitaker, do you take Aisha Coleman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and hold in sickness and health, until death do you part?" James responded instantly, his tone short and icy. "I do." He didn't look at Aisha. His eyes remained fixed on the judge, as if she didn't exist. Then it was Aisha's turn. The judge repeated the question, and the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Aisha felt her throat go dry. She wanted to scream, to run away, but her feet were rooted to the floor. She thought of nights sleeping in the rain, the scornful looks of strangers, and James's promise of a new life. She knew it wasn't kindness, but arrogance that drove him, but she had no other option. "I do," she whispered, her voice so soft it was barely audible. The judge nodded. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." There were no cheers, no smiles. Only a heavy silence settled over the room. James turned and gestured for Aisha to follow. "Let's go," he said, his tone devoid of emotion. Aisha followed, each step heavier than the last. Outside the courthouse, a sleek black sedan waited. The driver, a middle-aged man with an impassive face, opened the door for James. Aisha hesitated, unsure if she was even allowed in. "Get in," James said sharply, as if speaking to a slow child. Aisha climbed in, sitting stiffly on the plush leather seat. The car's luxury made her feel like a stain on a perfect painting. She clutched her old coat tightly, fearing any movement might break something. James sat beside her, but didn't look at her. He scrolled through his phone fingers, moving swiftly across the screen, as if she didn't exist. The driver started the engine, the smooth hum breaking the silence between them. As the car rolled through the streets of New York, Aisha stared out the window, her eyes drifting past skyscrapers, rushing crowds, and other homeless people like her just hours ago. She wondered if they had ever dreamed of an escape like the one she now had, or if they had already given up hope. She thought of her days at the community center when she helped a black woman named Maya escape life on the streets. Maya had cried and hugged her, calling her an angel. But now Aisha was no one's angel, just a woman trying to survive. The car stopped before James's mansion, a grand estate with white stone columns and a perfectly manicured garden. Aisha stepped out, the sound of her worn shoes tapping awkwardly on the stone path. She felt like an intruder, a ghost in a world of light and perfection. James walked ahead without looking back. "Follow me," he said curtly. They entered the grand foyer, where a massive chandelier hung like a sky full of stars. Aisha stopped, overwhelmed by the sheer opulence. She had never seen anything like this, not even in her dreams. But the awe quickly gave way to isolation. She didn't belong here, and the polite but cold stares of the nearby staff only reinforced that. James led her down a long hallway, stopping at a wooden door. He opened it, revealing a small but elegant bedroom with crisp white linens and a window facing the garden. Compared to the rest of the mansion, the room was modest, but it felt like a palace to Aisha. "You'll stay here," James said flatly. "Meals will be brought to you. If you need anything, ask the staff. Please don't bother me." Aisha nodded, still clutching her coat. She wanted to say something, thank you, or at least ask why, but the words were stuck in her throat. James glanced at her briefly, his eyes scanning her like an item being appraised. Then he turned and shut the door, leaving Aisha alone in the unfamiliar room. She stood there, her back against the door, breath trembling. The room was quiet, but a storm raged in her mind. She had signed up for this new life, but knew it wasn't freedom. She was a piece in James's game, a pawn on his board. But as she sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to wrinkle the sheets, a flicker of resolve sparked within her. She would survive this, just as she had survived everything else. And maybe, just maybe, she would find a way to reclaim herself. On her first morning in James Whitaker's mansion, Aisha Coleman awoke in an unfamiliar bed, sunlight slipping through silk curtains and warming her face. She lay still, afraid that any movement might disturb the perfection of the room. The crisp white sheets, the scent of polished wood, and the faint sound of birds singing from the garden outside. Just a few days ago, she had been sleeping on the pavement, hugging a piece of cardboard to shield herself from the rain. Now she was here, in a world she had never dared to dream of, but what she felt was not relief, but a suffocating sense of displacement. Aisha sat up unconsciously, clutching her tattered coat, the only thing left from her life. She looked around the room, small but luxurious, with an empty wardrobe and a large mirror hanging on the wall. She avoided looking into the mirror. She already knew what she'd see: a weary woman with dark skin smudged with dirt, tangled hair, and eyes carrying scars no one could see. She didn't avoid her reflection out of shame, but because it reminded her how much of herself she had lost. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. A middle-aged woman in a housekeeper's uniform entered with a breakfast tray, freshly baked bread, ripe fruit, and a steaming cup of fragrant coffee. "Your breakfast, ma'am," the woman said politely, though her tone was distant. Aisha nodded, feeling like an intruder. The word ma'am felt foreign, like a garment that didn't fit. When the woman left, Aisha stared at the tray. Her stomach growled with hunger. She reached for a slice of bread, her fingers trembling. She remembered the days as a social worker, bringing leftover bread from the community center to share with people experiencing homelessness. Now she received charity, but not from kindness, from a rich man's wager. She took a small bite, chewing slowly, as if afraid that eating too quickly might make her forget who she was. Just a few hours later, James appeared at the door, wearing a deep blue suit, highlighting his tall frame. He knocked, but didn't wait for permission before entering. "Get ready," he said dryly. "Today, we begin." "Begin what?" Aisha asked, her eyes guarded. James raised an eyebrow, as if the question was redundant. "Turning you into someone fit for my world," he replied with a hint of smugness. "I've hired the best dermatologists, nutritionists, trainers. They'll help you fix everything." His words cut like a blade, cold and sharp. Aisha clenched her fists, shame rising in her throat. "Fix," she repeated, her voice low but edged. "Do you think I'm broken?" James looked at her with a flicker of surprise, but he quickly returned to composure. "You know what I mean," he said. "You want to stay here, don't you? Then you'll need to change your appearance, manners, everything. That's the deal." Aisha wanted to fight back, to scream in his face that she didn't need to be fixed and that she was a person, not a project. But she stayed silent, knowing he was right. She had agreed to this, even if it bled her pride dry. She nodded, eyes cast downward, unwilling to let him see the pain inside her. That afternoon, a team of specialists arrived at the mansion. First was the dermatologist, a white woman with a clinical voice and a cold gaze. She examined Aisha's skin, noting the scars and dryness from years spent outdoors. She said, "We can significantly improve this by describing a canvas needing restoration." Aisha sat still, feeling like a doll being turned over. The doctor prescribed creams, supplements, and an array of laser treatments. "It will take time," she warned, "but the results will be worth it." Next came the nutritionist, a young man with a friendly smile but assessing eyes. He handed Aisha a detailed meal plan: salads, lean proteins, smoothies, all unfamiliar. "Your body needs recovery," he explained. "Malnutrition has done a lot of damage." Aisha nodded, but the word malnutrition echoed like an accusation. She hadn't chosen hunger. Life had forced it on her. Lastly came the fitness trainer, a strong woman with a firm voice. She led Aisha to the mansion's private gym, where state-of-the-art equipment gleamed like jewelry. She said, "We'll start with light exercises to build strength and posture." Dressed in new workout clothes provided by staff, Aisha felt out of place. She jogged on the treadmill, each step a reminder that she was being reshaped to fit into James's mold. Throughout it all, Aisha felt like a puppet, her strings pulled by James's invisible hand. She despised it, but she noticed a slight change each time she glanced in the mirror. Her skin was less dry, her hair was washed and neatly combed, and her body began to regain vitality. One evening, standing in the bathroom mirror, she startled herself. The woman staring back wasn't the Aisha of the streets, worn down and invisible. She looked stronger and more alive, though not yet the Aisha she once knew. James watched everything from a distance. He didn't appear in person often, but received daily reports from the specialists. "She's progressing," the dermatologist noted. "Faster than I expected." James nodded, though a strange unease stirred within him, something he couldn't name. Aisha wasn't just hanging on the outside. There was something in her eyes, in how she carried herself, even under surveillance, that felt like a challenge. He dismissed the thought, reminding himself this was just a project, a bet to win against Marcus. But when he saw Aisha walking down the corridor, sleek black hair, sharp gaze, he couldn't deny she was becoming someone he hadn't anticipated. Aisha sat on her bed that night hugging her old coat. She thought of her mother, who always said real beauty comes from within. But she also thought of the judgmental stares on the street, the whispers about her skin, and the chance James had laid before her, though it came at a cost. She wasn't sure if she could become the lady James envisioned, but she swore she wouldn't let him take her soul. She would use this opportunity to reclaim herself, step by step. The party at James Whittaker's mansion sparkled like an oil painting light from the crystal chandeliers, bathed the carefully made-up faces and expensive evening attire. The guests, tycoons, politicians, and celebrities from New York's upper class, moved through the room like choreographed dancers, their laughter blending with the clinking of champagne glasses. This was James's stage, where he always shone. But tonight, every eye was on Aisha Coleman. Aisha stood at the top of the grand staircase, her hands gently clutching the edge of the emerald green gown James had chosen for her. The dress hugged her form, complementing her now smooth, dark skin, thanks to the treatments, and her black hair was softly curled. She was no longer the ragged woman under the streetlight. She looked like a lady, but her eyes were still sharp, filled with caution and quiet strength. As she descended the stairs, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Whispers spread, some admiring, but most filled with curiosity and judgment. James stood near the fireplace, a glass of wine in hand, his gaze sweeping over Aisha. He couldn't deny that she was beautiful, not just because of her physical transformation, but because she held her spine straight, as if no one in the room had the right to make her bow her head. Yet he also felt a vague discomfort. This was the first time he introduced Aisha to his world, and he knew she would be scrutinized for her background and skin color. Aisha walked into the crowd feeling like she was entering an arena. She recognized the looks, some curious, some disdainful, and others hiding envy behind fake smiles. She was used to being seen as an outsider, but tonight, the judgment felt sharper, like blades honed for a single purpose. A middle-aged woman in a striking red dress and a glittering pearl necklace approached her, smile not quite reaching her eyes. "You must be Mrs. Whittaker," the woman asked, her tone sweet, but loaded with implication. "How unexpected. I didn't think James would choose someone quite as unique as you." Aisha tightened her grip, but her face remained calm. She had heard these kinds of comments before, veiled remarks about her skin and origins, wrapped in layers of politeness. "Unique," she repeated, her tone gentle but edged. "What exactly do you mean?" The woman blinked clearly, not expecting Aisha to push back. "Oh, I mean, you know, not everyone gets the opportunity to enter this world," she said, her smile stiffening. "You must be very lucky." Aisha smiled, but her eyes were cold. "Luck didn't bring me here," she replied. "I'm here because I deserve to be." Her words rang out enough for nearby guests to turn their heads. The woman flushed, mumbled an apology, and retreated. But Aisha knew she wasn't the only one who thought that way. Across the room, James witnessed the entire exchange. He saw how Aisha stood her ground, how she responded with a confidence he hadn't anticipated. A part of him felt proud she was proving he'd been right to choose her. But another part, deeper and more unsettled, felt ashamed. He knew those insults weren't just aimed at Aisha. They were aimed at him, a reminder that in the eyes of high society, marrying a black homeless woman was scandalous. As the night continued, Aisha navigated the crowd, trying to blend in. A few guests acted friendly, asking about her love story with James, but their questions always carried a thread of condescension. "How did you two meet?" One man asked, eyes scanning her like he was appraising an object. Aisha gave short answers, keeping a smile on her face, but inside anger simmered. She remembered her days as a social worker helping black women face prejudice. Now she was dissected and treated like an anomaly in James's world. In a corner, a group of women whispered among themselves, not bothering to lower their voices. "How did she even get in here?" One said, her tone thick with disdain. "James must be playing some game. Someone like her couldn't possibly be his wife." Aisha heard it. Each word landed like a cut. She wanted to turn back to shout that she wasn't someone like that she had once had a life, a purpose before the streets took it away. But she held her head high and kept walking. James, standing nearby, heard the whispers too. He gripped his wine glass tighter, discomfort rising in his chest. He wanted to step in to tell them to shut up, but he stopped himself. Doing so would only make things worse for Aisha and his reputation. He told himself this was part of the bet, that Aisha needed to learn how to face this world. But deep down he knew he was being a coward. He had thrown her into the arena, but didn't dare to stand beside her. As the party neared its end, Aisha stood alone by the large window, staring into the dark garden. She felt drained, not physically, but emotionally weighed down by the stares, the words, and the tension that had hung over her all evening. She thought of her mother, who once said that a black woman must be twice as strong to survive in this world. "You don't need their approval," her mother had said. "You only need your own." Aisha clenched her fists, feeling resolves to rise in her chest. She wouldn't let these people break her. She would use this chance not to prove anything to them, but herself. James approached, his glass now empty. "You did well," he said, his voice low, but void of warmth. "They're talking about you." Aisha turned to face him, her gaze sharp. "What are they saying?" She asked, a trace of challenge in her tone. "That I don't belong here. That I'm just your little joke." James blinked, surprised by her bluntness. "They're just curious," he said, but even he didn't sound convinced. "You'll have to get used to it." Aisha smiled, but there was no joy in it. "I've been used to judgment for a long time," she replied. "But don't expect me to bow to them, or to you." Her words struck like a slap, and James felt a strange discomfort. He wanted to retaliate, to remind her that she was here because of him. But he said nothing when he looked into her eyes, steady, unflinching, unbroken. For the first time, he questioned whether he truly had control of this wager. Aisha turned away and left the ballroom, leaving James with disordered thoughts. She didn't know what awaited her next, but she knew one thing: she would not let this world define her. Not James, not the arrogant guests, and not the prejudices that had tried to cage her all her life. The days following the James Whittaker's mansion party passed in silence and tension. Aisha Coleman felt like a ghost haunting this luxurious house, where every surface gleamed and every glance was cautious. She spent most of her time in her small bedroom, avoiding the grand hallways, where her footsteps echoed like reminders that she didn't belong. But no matter how much she tried to shrink herself, James's world kept pulling her out with the constant appointments: dermatologist, nutritionist, trainer. Every day, she felt molded like a clay statue, shaped by hands that cared nothing for the soul inside. That afternoon, Aisha left her room, not out of curiosity, but because the four walls had become too suffocating. She walked through the corridors, her soft new shoes, a gift from James, making no sound on the marble floors. The mansion was eerily quiet, broken only by the faint rustle of staff doing their tasks. She passed the dining room and library, and finally stopped near the staff quarters, where the scent of floor cleaner mingled with the aroma of coffee from the kitchen. As she neared the laundry room, a slight sound made her pause, the muffled sobs of someone trying to hide their pain. Aisha hesitated, her eyes drifting to a door left slightly ajar. She knew she shouldn't interfere. She was a stranger here, a Mrs. Whitaker only in name, with no right to intrude on anyone's life. But that sound, fragile and full of despair, touched something deep within her. The part of her that once was Aisha Coleman, the social worker who listened and helped without hesitation. She gently pushed the door open and saw a young woman sitting on the floor, knees pulled to her chest, face buried in her hands. The girl wore a staff uniform, her brown hair tied back, though loose strands fell over her eyes, red from crying. Aisha recognized her Sarah, the one who had brought her breakfast a few times. Always polite, always smiling, but never meeting Aisha's gaze directly. "Sarah," Aisha called softly, her voice gentle, the same tone she once used with women at the Brooklyn Community Center. "Are you all right?" Sarah startled, looking up, her eyes wide with panic. She quickly wiped her tears and scrambled to her feet, her uniform slightly wrinkled. I'm sorry, ma'am," she stammered. "I shouldn't. I was just. I'll get back to work right away." "It's okay," Aisha said, stepping inside while keeping a respectful distance so Sarah wouldn't feel threatened. "You didn't do anything wrong. I heard, and I was concerned." Sarah blinked clearly, not used to anyone in the mansion caring about her feelings. She bit her lip, glancing toward the door, afraid someone might see her. "I shouldn't be crying on the job," she whispered. "If Mr. Whitaker finds out, I could get fired." Aisha said, "Mr. Whitaker won't know," her voice firm yet soothing. "I won't tell anyone. Do you want to talk? Sometimes saying things out loud helps." Sarah hesitated, clutching the hem of her uniform. She looked at Aisha, as if weighing whether she could trust this stranger, the woman the whole mansion whispered about, as the boss's wife, yet whom no one understood. Finally, Sarah exhaled and sat back down on the floor. Aisha sat beside her, not caring if her new dress got dirty. "It's my tuition," Sarah began, voice trembling. "I'm taking night classes nursing, but I can't afford it this semester. I've been trying to save, but my mom's sick and it's all piling up." She stopped, tears rolling again. "I don't want to drop out. It's my dream." Aisha listened, her heart tightening. She remembered her community center days helping people like Sarah, those pushed to the edge by life, but still holding on to hope. She remembered a young woman named Maya, who had cried in her arms when she received a scholarship, sitting on the laundry room floor. Aisha felt a part of herself return, a part she thought had died on the cold New York streets. "I understand," Aisha said, her voice soft but sincere. "I've been in hard places too. It's not always easy, but you're stronger than you think, Sarah. You're studying, working, caring for your mother. That takes courage. That's not something just anyone can do." Sarah looked at her, eyes filled with disbelief and doubt. You've been through hardship," she asked quietly. "But you're Mrs. Whitaker. You live here with him." Aisha gave a bittersweet smile, her gaze drifting to the worn coat she kept in her room. "I haven't always lived here," she said. "I used to live on the street, Sarah. I know what it feels like. There's no way out." Her confession dropped like a stone into still water. Sarah blinked, lips parting in shock. "You were homeless," she whispered, as if saying it too loud would shatter the moment. Aisha nodded, her eyes distant. "I used to be a social worker helping people like me. Then my family went bankrupt, and I lost everything. I'm not telling you this to make you pity me, Sarah. I'm telling you because I understand, and you can make it through." Sarah said nothing, but her tears returned, not from despair this time, but comfort. For the first time, she felt seen not as an invisible worker, but as a person. "Thank you," she whispered. "Hearing you say that, I feel lighter." Aisha placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder, gentle, warm. "If you ever need to talk, I'm here," she said. "We don't have to be alone." Sarah nodded, a faint smile forming. At that moment, Aisha felt a spark in the small laundry room, a small but precious connection in this cold house. She was no longer Mrs. Whitaker or James's project. She was Aisha, the woman who once gave others hope and was now learning to return it to herself. From afar, James stood at the end of the hallway, having witnessed the moment by chance. He had come to summon Aisha for progress updates from the specialists, but seeing her sitting on the floor and speaking to Sarah made him pause. Something about the way Aisha listened, the way she said, struck him. She wasn't like the women in his world, those who always tried to impress or manipulate. She was real, and that unsettled him, because it reminded him how he had treated her like a possession. James turned away before Aisha noticed his chest tight with a feeling he didn't want to name. He told himself this was just a wager, that Aisha was a challenge to overcome. But when he closed his office door behind him, he couldn't shake the image of Aisha on the laundry room floor, her eyes glowing with a compassion he had never seen in anyone in his world. Back in her room, Aisha sat on her bed hugging her old coat. She thought of Sarah, of Maya, of herself. She didn't know if she could change James's world, but she knew one thing: she wouldn't let it change her. She would hold on to her compassion like a small flame that never goes out. And maybe, just maybe, it would guide her through the shadows of this mansion. The evening at James Whitaker's mansion was tranquil, only the wind rustling through the garden and the soft glow of porch lights offered signs of life. After another long day with the specialists, Aisha Coleman had withdrawn to her room, leaving James alone in his vast office, where the oak-paneled walls and rows of old books seemed to close in on him. He sat behind his desk, a glass of whiskey in hand, eyes fixed on his laptop screen, but his mind drifted. The image of Aisha in the laundry room speaking to Sarah with a sincerity he had never seen before replayed repeatedly in his head. It made him uncomfortable, not because of her, but because it reminded him he had been wrong to view her as a project. A sudden knock pulled James out of his thoughts. He frowned. He wasn't expecting anyone at this hour. "Come in," he said curtly. He said. The door opened and in walked Marcus Reed, his familiar half-smile in place. He wore a gray suit and held a glass of scotch as if he had helped himself from James's bar. Marcus's casual confidence always irritated James, an old dance of power between them since their college days. James' old friend Marcus said, his tone smooth and laced with provocation. "Your little experiment is coming along nicely. Miss Coleman's quite the surprise, isn't she?" James's grip on his whiskey glass tightened, his eyes sharpening. "She's not an experiment," he replied, voice low and tense. "She's my wife." Marcus let out a loud laugh that echoed through the quiet room. "Your wife," he repeated mockingly. "Come on, James. We both know this is a game. You married a black woman off the street to prove you could mold anyone, and I have to admit you've done better than I expected. She almost looks like a lady now." His words struck a match to the slow-burning anger inside James. He stood palms flat on the desk, eyes locked on Marcus. Watch your words, he warned, voice like ice. She's not she. Her name is Aisha, and she's done more with her strength than any of your hollow socialite friends could. Marcus raised his eyebrows, clearly entertained by James's reaction. He stepped closer, swirling his scotch. Oh, James, don't tell me you're starting to feel something for her, he said, teasing but cutting. You know she doesn't belong here. You can dress her up in designer gowns and teach her how to hold a wine glass, but she's still a black homeless woman at the end of the day. Do you think your world will ever accept her? They're laughing behind your back. James felt the heat rise to his temples. He wanted to hit Marcus to wipe that smug smile off his face. But he didn't, not out of fear, but because deep down, a part he hated to admit, he'd once thought the same. When he first saw Aisha under the streetlight, he had seen her as invisible someone beneath his attention. He had married her out of pride to prove his wealth could shape anyone. But now, after seeing her strength, her compassion with Sarah, and how she stood tall against prejudice at the party, he couldn't deny she had forced him to re-examine himself. You're wrong, James said, his voice steady but resolute. Aisha doesn't need anyone's approval. She's stronger than all of us combined. And if you can't see that, then you're the one who doesn't belong here. Marcus blinked, his smirk faltering for just a second. He hadn't expected James to push back this hard, but he quickly recovered, shrugging as if unbothered. All right, James, he said. Keep playing your game, but don't be surprised when it collapses. She's not someone you can control forever. And when you lose, remember, I'm still waiting for my 2 million. James stepped closer, his stare piercing. Get out, he said, voice calm but commanding. And next time you speak about Aisha, use her name, or you'll regret it. Marcus scoffed, but a flicker of unease crossed his face. He set down his glass and turned to leave, leaving James behind, the anger still burning in his chest. James sank into his chair when the door closed, massaging his temples. He took a sip of whiskey, but it did nothing to ease the pressure constricting his heart. He thought of Aisha, her sharp eyes at the party, the way she had responded to insults with a dignity he hadn't anticipated. He thought of the moment she sat with Sarah, her voice soft yet powerful. He had been wrong to think of her as part of a wager. She wasn't something to mold. She was a person with scars and dreams he had never bothered to ask about. James stood and stepped onto the balcony, city lights twinkling in the distance. He recalled Marcus's words. She doesn't belong here. But he asked himself, did he? Did he truly belong in this world of pretense, where people judged each other by money and skin color, where compassion was seen as a weakness? With everything she had endured, Aisha seemed stronger than anyone he knew in his world. Aisha sat on her bed in her room, holding her old coat. She didn't know about the confrontation between James and Marcus, but she felt a shift in the air. She thought of Sarah, of the people she used to help at the community center, and herself. She remembered her mother's words. You don't need their love, Aisha. You need your own. She clutched her coat tighter, feeling her resolve return. She wasn't here to please James or to fit into his world. She was here to survive, and maybe, just maybe, to find the Aisha Coleman she had lost. From the balcony, James looked up at the night sky. For the first time, he wondered if this bet had ever really been about money, or if it was changing him in ways he never expected. He didn't have an answer, but he knew one thing: Aisha Coleman was not someone he could walk away from easily, and that, more than anything, terrified him. The library in James Whitaker's mansion was a quiet sanctuary where the warm golden glow from the table lamps spilled over tall oak shelves. Leather-bound books lined the walls, exuding the scent of aged paper and ink, as if they carried the secrets of the world within them. Aisha Coleman stood in the center of the room, her fingers trailing gently along the spine of a book, The Sociological Souls by W.E.B. Du Bois. She never imagined. Early morning light streamed through the dining room windows of James Whittaker's mansion, casting a pale glow over the long wooden table where Aisha Coleman sat across from him. The air between them still held a trace of tension from their conversation in the library the week before, but something had shifted. The coldness was no longer absolute. In its place was a cautious curiosity. Aisha, dressed in a simple sweater and new jeans, held a stack of handwritten notes. Her eyes were steady, though laced with apprehension. She'd stayed up all night thinking about this, and today she would say it out loud. "Mr. Whittaker, Aisha," began, her voice precise but cautious. "I have a proposal, a charitable foundation to support the homeless and underserved communities, especially people of color. I'm calling it HorizonHope." James, mid-sip of coffee, set his cup down, his sharp blue eyes fixed on her. He didn't respond right away. His silence didn't signal dismissal. It was the pause of evaluation. "A charity." He repeated, a hint of surprise in his tone. "Do you take me for some philanthropist?" Aisha clenched the notes tighter, restraining her irritation at his mocking tone. "I'm not asking you to do this out of kindness," she replied, voice calm but edged. "I'm asking because it matters. You have money. You have influence. I have experience. I've worked with these people. I know what they need." James tilted his head, his gaze shifting to the papers in her hand. He recalled her story in the library those years as a social worker, the people she'd helped before life had thrown her into the gutter. A part of him wanted to reject her idea outright, to remind her that she was here because of a bet not to change the world. But another part, the part that had been quietly growing since he saw her with Sarah, stood against Marcus and faced him with brutal honesty, was curious. He wanted to see what she might do. "Tell me," he said, his voice low, no longer sarcastic. "What do you want to do with HorizonHope?" Aisha inhaled deeply, her eyes lighting up with a passion she hadn't yet revealed in his presence. She said, "I want to build community centers that offer temporary housing, medical care, and job training. Not handouts, upliftment, the kind I used to give in Brooklyn. Especially for people of color, those the system discards. I want them to know they're not invisible." James listened, his fingers tapping faintly against the table, his eyes never leaving hers. This wasn't a passing whim. She had thought it through, grounded in her lived experience. He thought of his world-lavish galas, multi-million-dollar deals, and hollow social circles. He had never considered using his wealth for anything beyond power and preservation. But looking at Aisha with fire in her voice and steel in her spine, he felt a strange pull not to impress her, but to see if he could build something that meant something. "Sounds good," he said neutrally. "But you know it won't be easy. Funding, permits, politics. Have you thought about that?" Aisha nodded, her gaze unwavering. "I know. I've worked with NGOs before. I know how to apply for grants and deal with city bureaucracy. But I need your support, not just money, but your reach. People like you can open doors, but I can't." James gave a faint smile, not smug this time, but faintly impressed. "You believe in this, don't you?" he asked. "I do," Aisha answered firmly. "Because I've lived it. I know it can change lives." James was silent momentarily, his gaze drifting out the window, where the perfectly trimmed gardens gleamed in the sunlight. He thought of Marcus, the mocking words about Aisha, and himself, the man who once believed money could shape anyone, even buy someone's dignity. He wasn't sure he believed in HorizonHope, but he thought in Aisha's eyes. "All right," he said at last. "I'll support it. But you'll have to prove it's worth it." Aisha nodded, a flicker of hope in her eyes, but she remained cautious. "Thank you," she said quietly but sincerely. "I won't let you down." The following weeks became a whirlwind of activity. Aisha worked tirelessly, reconnecting with former NGO contacts, drafting proposals, and meeting potential donors. James provided resources, office space, legal counsel, and an initial fund, but he let Aisha lead, watching from a distance, with growing intrigue. But as James had warned, obstacles quickly emerged. Some donors declined, claiming the charity market was too saturated. Others were more blunt, suggesting her focus on communities of color was too sensitive and divisive. A powerful local politician, crucial to obtaining permits, pressured her to reword the mission, urging her to make it more inclusive to avoid splitting the community. These challenges infuriated Aisha, but they didn't break her. She began holding town halls in low-income neighborhoods, listening to the homeless single mothers and young men lost to the system. She documented their stories, turning them into her fuel. At one meeting, an older man with calloused hands took her hand and said, "You're our hope, child. Don't give up." His words brought her to tears and reignited the fire inside her. Though not present at the meetings, James found himself drawn into the effort. He used his connections to pressure the uncooperative politician, threatening to pull investments from city projects if HorizonHope wasn't approved. He privately met with hesitant donors, convincing them with the sharp edge of a businessman. But for the first time, he did it for something other than personal gain. He was surprised to realize that he cared. One evening after a long day, Aisha sat at the temporary HorizonHope office, paperwork stacked high around her. She was exhausted, but her eyes still gleamed with determination. James entered holding 2 cups of coffee. "You're overworking yourself," he said, setting a cup in front of her. Aisha looked up at him, skepticism flickering in her eyes. "I don't have a choice," she replied. "If I stop, those people lose their chance." James sat across from her, his eyes lingering on her face. "You remind me that the world is bigger than I ever let myself see," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. "I won't pretend I'm a good man, Aisha, but I want to help you. Not because of the bet, because I believe in you." Aisha sat in silence, searching his eyes for signs of truth. She didn't fully trust him, not after everything. But she sensed a shift, not redemption, but a step in the right direction. "Thank you," she said, voice soft. "But this is only the beginning." James nodded, a rare smile forming on his lips. And in that moment, surrounded by papers, dim lighting, and worn hands, they were no longer the manipulator and the manipulated. They were 2 people scarred differently, trying to build something greater than themselves. I would find such a book here in the home of a white millionaire like James. But as she opened the first page, the words about struggle and identity touched something deep inside her, momentarily easing the suffocating weight of her new life. Aisha had lived in the mansion for nearly a month, and every day felt like a silent battle. The specialists, dermatologists, nutritionists, trainers continued to sculpt her into the image James had envisioned. Her skin was smoother, her hair sleek and glossy, her body firmer. Yet she still felt like a puppet pulled by invisible strings. But moments like this alone with a book in her hands offered a fleeting taste of freedom. Soft footsteps broke the silence. Aisha looked up to see James standing at the door, his deep blue suit slightly wrinkled as if he'd had a long day. His sharp blue eyes moved over her, then rested on the book in her hands. "Du Bois," he said, a hint of surprise in his voice. "I didn't expect you to be reading something like that." Aisha closed the book slowly, her gaze wary. "Didn't expect me to read it all? Or didn't expect me to read Black scholarship?" she asked, her voice light but laced with steel. James blinked clearly, caught off guard by her directness. He stepped inside and closed the door as though wanting to keep this conversation away from the ears of the staff. He said, "I didn't mean it like that," though his tone lacked conviction. "I didn't think you'd be interested in sociology." Aisha gave a thin smile and set the book down on the table. "I was a social worker, Mr. Whitaker," she replied, emphasizing his surname like a reminder of the distance between them. "I worked with the abandoned, the unseen people your world never bothers to acknowledge. I'm not just interested in sociology. I lived it." James stood still, eyes locked on her. He had read snippets of her background in preliminary reports, but never truly listened. To him, she had been just another homeless woman, part of a wager with Marcus. But now, seeing her stand before him with eyes that refused to flinch and a voice brimming with quiet authority, he felt an unexpected ripple of respect. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the leather chair near the desk. "Tell me." Aisha frowned slightly, uncertain of his intent. She had grown used to James's cold commands, clipped instructions, and scrutinizing gaze. But tonight, his voice was different, not kindness, but curiosity, as if he genuinely wanted to understand. She hesitated, then sat, keeping the book on her lap like a shield. "I grew up in Brooklyn." She began, her tone even but heavy with meaning. "My family wasn't wealthy, but we were okay. My mom was a nurse. My dad drove a city bus. They taught me education was the way out. So I studied hard, went to college, and became a social worker. I wanted to help people like me, black people left behind by the system." She paused, her eyes flicking to James, gauging if he genuinely listened. He nodded, resting his chin on his hand, eyes fixed on her. "I worked at a community center." Aisha continued, her voice softening as memories returned. "Helped people experiencing homelessness find shelter, got scholarships for single moms, and kept kids away from gangs. I thought I was making a difference. Then my family lost everything in a bad investment. My parents died. I couldn't keep the house. I lost my job. Lost everything. One day I was helping others. The next I was sleeping on the streets." Her story hung in the air, heavy like the chill of night. James felt something twist in his chest, not because of her pain, but because he had never considered any of this. He had grown up surrounded by privileged elite schools, inherited wealth, and the assurance that success was his by birthright. He had never struggled for anything except to maintain status among the elite. But Aisha, she had fought, and she was still fighting even after the world turned its back on her. "Why didn't you give up?" he asked quietly, almost in a whisper. "After all that, you could have—" Aisha cut in, her gaze sharp. "Because I'm the woman my mother raised me to be," she said. "She told me a black woman has to be strong, because the world will never be easy on us. I didn't give up because I'd lose myself if I did, and I'd rather die than let that happen." Her words struck like a blow, not with rage, but with truth. James looked at her, and for the first time saw not just the woman he brought into his home, but a person with dreams, wounds, and a strength far surpassing anything he'd imagined. He thought of his argument with Marcus and the snide comments about her skin and past. He had defended her, but now he realized she never needed defending. She was stronger than him 100 times over. James began, then stopped. He didn't know what to say. He wanted to apologize, to admit he'd been wrong, to reduce her to a bet. But his pride, the very thing that had guided him his entire life, held him back. Instead, he said, "You surprise me, Aisha. I didn't know you had that kind of story." Aisha gave a faint, tired smile. Her eyes held sadness, but not bitterness. "You never asked," she said, voice soft but cutting. "You looked at me and saw a homeless woman. But I've always been this person, Mr. Whitaker. You didn't choose to see it." James didn't respond. He stared, feeling exposed beneath her gaze. For the first time, he felt shame, not because of her, but because of himself. He believed he was in control, shaping her into something new. But now he understood Aisha was not someone to be shaped. She was a flame, and he had walked too close. Aisha stood book in hand and moved toward the door. "Thank you for listening," she said softly, but sincerely. "But this doesn't change anything between us. I'm here because I have to be, not because I want to." James sat alone as the door clicked shut behind her, eyes fixed on the empty chair. He took a sip of whiskey, which did nothing to soothe the chaos inside him. He thought of Marcus's insults, the stares at the party, and Aisha's story. For the first time, he wondered if this wager had ever truly been about winning, or if it was forcing him to confront the man he was. And that thought more than anything frightened him. Aisha sat on her bed in her room holding the book close. She thought of the conversation with James, of the look in his eyes. Not cold as usual, but curious. Maybe even respectful. She didn't trust him, not after everything. But she sensed a shift, a small crack in the wall between them. She thought of her mother, of Sarah and herself. She didn't know if she could change James's world, but she would not let it change her. She would hold on to who she was, no matter the cost. The HorizonHope Charity Gala occurred in a grand ballroom in the heart of Manhattan, where light from crystal chandeliers sparkled over tables draped in white silk and glittering champagne glasses. Guests from tycoons and politicians to social activists gathered to support the organization's mission, providing housing, healthcare, and job training for the homeless and underprivileged communities, especially people of color. But for Aisha Coleman, standing backstage this moment wasn't just an event. It was a chance to prove that she wasn't just James Whitaker's wife, but a leader with her vision and strength. Aisha wore a long sapphire blue gown that hugged her figure, highlighting her deep ebony skin, now glowing with care and growing confidence. Her hair was lightly curled, falling over her shoulders, and her eyes shone with determination and a hint of anxiety. She clutched the speech in her hands, the lines she had written and rewritten throughout the week. This was her first time addressing a crowd as the leader of HorizonHope, and she knew every eye would scrutinize her, not just for the organization's mission, but for who she was, a black woman once homeless, now standing beside a white millionaire. James Whitaker stood across the ballroom, his black tuxedo accentuating his tall frame and sharp blue eyes. He watched Aisha from afar, sensing the tension in her posture. He had seen her working tirelessly for this gala, persuading sponsors, organizing the event, and writing the speech. He was awed by her dedication, but also felt a strange unease. Tonight, she wasn't just representing HorizonHope. She was representing him, and he knew this elite world would not accept her easily. When the host introduced Aisha, the hall filled with polite applause. She stepped onto the stage, the spotlight glaring at her like a beam exposing every flaw. But Aisha held her head high, her gaze sweeping over the crowd, drawing courage from memories of her mother Sarah and the people she had met in community meetings. She took a deep breath and began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen," her voice rang out clear and powerful. "HorizonHope is not just a charity. It promises that everyone deserves a second chance, regardless of background or skin color. I know this because I was one of them. I once lived on the streets, rendered invisible by the world. But I stand here today, not because of luck, but because I refuse to let my circumstances define me." The hall fell silent, broken only by the rustle of paper as reporters took notes. Aisha spoke of her journey from being a social worker in Brooklyn to her years of homelessness to now leading HorizonHope. She said of the people she had met stories filled with resilience and hope and the organization's vision for building a more just future. Her words touched the audience, many nodding in empathy, some even wiping away tears. From the corner of the room, James felt an unexpected surge of pride. He had seen Aisha confront prejudice Marcus and even himself, but tonight she shone in a way he had never imagined. She wasn't just a project. She was an unstoppable force. But when the Q&A session began, the atmosphere shifted. An elderly investor dressed in a gray suit and bearing a judgmental gaze raised his hand. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, emphasizing her married name with a tinge of mockery. "I appreciate your story, but don't you think focusing on communities of color is too narrow? Aren't you overlooking others in need?" Aisha tightened her hands, but her face remained calm. "That's a good question, sir," she replied, her voice unwavering. Horizon. Hope serves all in need, but we prioritize the most disadvantaged communities, and data shows that people of color face higher rates of homelessness and poverty. Ignoring that reality is ignoring justice. Scattered applause echoed through the hall, but the man persisted. "And what about your background?" He continued, his tone laced with insinuation. "You were once homeless. How can we trust that you can lead an organization like this?" The room tensed, whispers spreading like wildfire. Aisha felt a surge of anger, but held it back, thinking of her mother and those who counted on her. "I am qualified," she said, her voice like steel, "because I have lived through what HorizonHope is trying to fix. I know the pain of being abandoned and the power of hope. That's something no classroom can teach." The applause was louder this time, though some eyes still held doubt. Standing at the edge of the room, James felt his blood boil. He realized the man's question wasn't just an insult to Aisha. It was an attack on him, on his decision to bring her into this world. He had once been cowardly and silent when she was judged at the previous party, but he couldn't bear it this time. James stepped onto the stage, his gaze cold, but expression composed. The room fell silent. Every eye turned to him. He said, "If I may say a word," his voice was deep and commanding. He turned to Aisha, a flicker of gentleness in his eyes, then looked directly at the man who had asked the question. "Aisha Coleman is the most capable woman I've ever met. She doesn't just have experience. She has the heart and vision we need to change the world. I'm lucky to stand beside her, and anyone who doubts her competence is doubting the very future HorizonHope stands for." The hall erupted into applause, this time genuine and thunderous. Aisha looked at James, her eyes a mix of surprise and gratitude, and a touch of skepticism. She knew he wasn't someone who spoke such words lightly, and she wondered whether it was a performance for the audience or a sincere moment. As the gala ended, Aisha stood alone on the ballroom balcony gazing at the city lights. She felt exhausted, but also full of hope. James approached, holding 2 glasses of water, and handed her one. "You did it," he said, his voice low but warm. "Tonight was yours." Aisha took a sip, her eyes drifting toward him. "Why did you do that?" she asked quietly but sharply. "Going on stage saying all that. Was it for HorizonHope or you?" James was silent for a moment, his gaze tracing the horizon. "Both," he admitted. "I want HorizonHope to succeed, but I also want you to know that I see you, not as before, but as you are now, the woman changing everything." Aisha didn't answer right away. She thought of those early days when he looked at her like a possession of the insults she endured, and of the moment he defended her tonight. She didn't fully trust him yet, but she saw a crack in the wall of his pride, and maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of something different. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice sincere but guarded. "But don't think this changes everything. We still have a long way to go." James nodded, a rare smile touching his lips. "I know," he said, "and I'm ready." They stood under the city lights, no longer controlled, but 2 people beginning to see each other with newfound respect. The gala night had changed not just HorizonHope, but their relationship, a small step, but a meaningful one. In the early morning garden of James Whittaker's estate, gentle sunlight filtered through the trees, casting speckled light over the stone pathway. Roses and hydrangeas bloomed in full glory, releasing their sweet fragrance. But Aisha Coleman, seated on a wooden bench beneath an ancient oak tree, paid no attention to the beauty around her. She held a cup of tea, her gaze distant, her mind circling the past few months, from the night beneath the streetlights to the charity gala, and the slow but unmistakable shift in how James had treated her. She didn't fully trust him, but she couldn't deny that he had become indispensable to her journey with HorizonHope. James stepped out of the mansion, his usual suit replaced by a simple white shirt and slacks, a rare change for him. He stopped a few steps away from Aisha, hands in his pockets, his sharp blue eyes tinged with hesitation, an expression Aisha had never seen on him before. She looked up, her eyes wary. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice soft, but edged with caution. James took a deep breath and stepped closer, but didn't sit down. "I need to talk," he said, his voice low but sincere. "About everything, how we began, what I did." Aisha furrowed her brow and set the teacup down on the bench. "What are you trying to say?" she asked, her tone laced with doubt. She was used to James's control, his carefully measured words, but today there was something different, a vulnerability she hadn't expected. James looked at her, his gaze fixed as if afraid she might vanish if he blinked. "I was wrong." He began, his voice trembling slightly, something rare for a man always so confident. "When I met you under the streetlight, I didn't see you, not Aisha Coleman, not the woman who had helped so many, who had survived things I can't even imagine. I only saw an opportunity to prove that I could control everything, even you. I made you part of a bet with Marcus and treated you like a possession. I'm sorry, Aisha, from the bottom of my heart." His apology hung in the air, heavy and heartfelt. Aisha remained silent, her eyes scanning his face for any sign of insincerity. She had waited for this apology, even if she'd never admitted it to herself. But now that it had arrived, she wasn't sure how to feel. She recalled those early days, his cold stares, the clipped orders, and the humiliation of signing the marriage contract. But she also remembered recent moments, how he'd defended her at the gala, supported HorizonHope, and the curiosity in his eyes when she shared her past in the library. "Why now?" she asked, her voice soft but sharp. "Why are you saying this now?" After everything, James stepped closer and suddenly knelt on one knee before her, a move that startled Aisha. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple yet elegant ring, adorned with a sparkling sapphire. "Because you changed me," he said, his voice trembling but firm. "You showed me that life is not just about money or power. You showed me compassion, resilience, and what it means to fight for something bigger than yourself. I'm not apologizing for seeking redemption, Aisha. I'm apologizing because I want to begin again with you. Because I love you." Aisha blinked, her heart pounding in her chest. She looked at the ring, then into James's eyes no longer proud, but filled with sincerity and vulnerability. She thought of her mother, who once said, "True love is when two people grow together, not when one tries to control the other." She thought of her journey from the streets to this mansion, to the gala stage, and how James, though once an adversary, had become part of her story. But Aisha didn't answer immediately. She stood, walked a few steps away, and let her eyes sweep across the garden. She said, "You love me," her voice calm, but weighty. "But love isn't words, Mr. Whittaker. It's action. You hurt me. You treated me like a game. How do I know this isn't just another bet?" James rose to his feet, his eyes never leaving her. "I don't expect you to trust me right away," he said. I know I have to prove it not just today, but every day. I want to marry you, Aisha, not because of a bet, not for appearances, but because I can't imagine a life without you. But if you need time, I'll wait as long as it takes. Aisha turned back to him, her heart torn between past pain and future hope. She thought of Sarah, the people depending on HorizonHope, and herself, the woman who had survived it all. She didn't want her past to define her, but she wasn't about sacrificing her self-respect. All right, she said, her voice slightly shaky but resolute. I'll wear the ring, but not as a promise of marriage. Not yet. It's a promise that we'll try, that you'll prove yourself worthy. This is a beginning, not an end. James nodded, a gentle smile appearing on his lips. He stepped forward and carefully slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands trembling as they touched hers. A beginning, he echoed, his voice full of hope. I won't let you down. Aisha looked at the ring on her hand. It felt strange yet right. She didn't know the future, but she knew one thing: she would never let anyone, not even James, define her worth. She lifted her gaze to meet his, and at that moment, beneath the sunlight and the scent of flowers, they were no longer controller and controlled. They were two people, scarred and dreaming, standing at the edge of a new path, full of challenges but promise. James took her hand gently but firmly. Thank you, Aisha, he said, his voice soft but sincere, for giving me a chance. Aisha smiled for the first time without any guardedness. Don't make me regret it, she replied, her voice tinged with teasing. They stood there hand in hand, sunlight streaming through the trees, as if marking a new chapter in their story, a chapter not written in pride or prejudice, but in respect and hope. A small flame stirred in Aisha's heart, not love yet, but a belief that she could build a future besides a man learning to improve. And for James, this moment was the first time he felt truly alive, not for power, but for a woman who had changed everything he once believed. The afternoon sun bathed HorizonHope's newly built community center in Brooklyn in golden light and laughter. The building, with its blue-painted walls and large windows, stood as the result of months of tireless work by Aisha Coleman and James Whitaker. Today, it was more than just a place that offered housing, healthcare, and job training for people experiencing homelessness. It was the venue of their second wedding, a ceremony not born of a wager, but of love and genuine commitment. Aisha walked down the aisle between rows of chairs, wearing a simple white silk dress without a veil or elaborate jewelry. Her black hair was braided neatly and adorned with small flowers, and her eyes glowed with a peace she had never known. In her hands was a bouquet of wildflowers picked from the garden near the center, a quiet reminder of her journey from the cold streets to a future she had built with her own hands. The small crowd, HorizonHope staff people once helped by the organization, and Sarah, the housemaid, now Aisha's close friend, rose and applauded warmly. James stood at the end of the aisle in a light gray suit, his blue eyes never leaving Aisha. He was no longer the arrogant man who once stood in grand banquet halls boasting power and wealth. He was a man who had learned to listen, to give, and to love the woman who had changed his life. When Aisha reached him, he took her hand, warm and steady, and they turned to the officiant, an older woman who had once volunteered with HorizonHope. Your vows, the officiant said, her voice warm, are promises to each other, and a commitment to a more meaningful life. James looked into Aisha's eyes, his voice trembling slightly with emotion. Aisha, I promise to stand by you through every challenge, every joy, and every sorrow. You've taught me that life isn't about power, but love and service. I promise to keep striving to be the man you deserve. Aisha smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. She squeezed his hand, her voice strong despite the emotion. James, I promise to love you, not for who you once were, but for who you've chosen to become. Together we will build a family and a better world where everyone has a chance. As they exchanged rings, simple bands engraved with the word hope, the crowd applauded, some wiping away tears. Sarah, seated in the front row, beamed with pride, proud of the woman who once helped her complete nursing school and was now living her happiness. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, James pulled Aisha into his arms and kissed her softly but deeply, as if to etch the moment into eternity. Cheers erupted, and flower petals rained down, sparkling in the sunlight. After the ceremony, everyone gathered in the center's courtyard, where simple tables were set with sweets and fruit drinks. Children ran and laughed, while the adults chatted about the changes HorizonHope had brought. An older woman who had once lived on the streets held Aisha's hand and said, "You gave us hope, child. Thank you." Aisha embraced her, tears falling, not from sorrow, but joy. James stood nearby, watching Aisha with a pride he had never known. He thought of the night he met her beneath the streetlight, when all he saw was a chance to win a bet. Now she was the center of his world, not because she was his wife, but because she had given him a greater purpose. He walked over, slipped his arm around her waist, and whispered, "You're incredible, Aisha. Thank you for not giving up on me." Aisha turned to him, her eyes shining. "Thank you for changing," she replied, her voice gentle and sincere. They stood hand in hand, looking at the people around them. People who had become their family not by blood, but through shared struggle and hope. In the following years, HorizonHope expanded rapidly, opening more centers across the United States and helping thousands of homeless individuals and disadvantaged communities. Aisha became a renowned speaker, using her story to inspire resilience and social justice. She continued working directly in the centers, listening to those who needed her, just as she had in Brooklyn. Once a millionaire obsessed with control, James now dedicated most of his time and fortune to HorizonHope. He learned how to stand behind Aisha, support her without dominating, and found joy in creating real change. They adopted 2 children, a boy and a girl, who had lived in homes built by HorizonHope. In the evenings, they sat in their garden watching the children play among the flowers and discussed new plans for the organization. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in brilliant orange, James took Aisha's hand, his eyes filled with love. "You changed my life," he said, his voice low and sincere. "I never thought I could live like this." Aisha smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "And you gave me the chance to find myself again," she replied. "Together, we created something beautiful, James. Not for the money, but because we believed in it." They sat there, hand in hand, watching the sunset. Their life wasn't perfect. Challenges, prejudices, and hard days still existed. But they had learned to face them, not as 2 strangers bound by a wager, but as 2 souls who had chosen each other, chosen hope, and chosen a legacy that would live on through those they helped. Beneath the glow of dusk, Aisha thought of her mother Sarah and the nameless faces she had once passed on the streets. She knew her journey and theirs was far from over, but she also knew that with James by her side and HorizonHope in her heart, she had found a home not within grand walls, but in the love and purpose that had carried her through the darkness.